One of the disciples came to Jesus frustrated and desperate. He said, "Master, I've been doing what you taught. I ask, I pray, I petition the Father, but nothing happens. I ask, and I don't receive. The promise doesn't work for me. What am I doing wrong?" And Jesus looked at him with that patient expression he had when someone was missing something fundamental. He said, "You're asking wrong. Not wrong words, wrong frequency, wrong consciousness, wrong understanding of what asking even is." The disciple looked confused, saying, "But I'm following the prayers. I'm being humble. I'm asking sincerely." And Jesus said, "That's the problem. You're asking as if you don't have. You're begging as a separated human, hoping an external God decides to give you something. That's not asking, that's pleading. And pleading doesn't activate the system." The disciple asked, "What system?" And Jesus said, "There's a system." The monad responds to specific asking, not begging, not pleading, not hoping an external deity takes pity on you. It requires asking from already having, from alignment with Source, from recognition of what you are. When you ask this way, the monad doesn't decide whether to give. It releases what's already yours by nature. Ask and receive isn't petition, and maybe. It's claim and automatic. But only if you know how to ask. The way I'm teaching you now is the way the religious authorities will never teach, because if people knew this, they wouldn't need priests interceding for them. That teaching was systematically removed from the Bible. The Church kept "ask, and you shall receive" as a verse, but they removed the entire teaching about how to ask. What frequency, what consciousness, what recognition has to be present for asking to actually work? Because if Christians knew there's a specific system, a mechanics to asking that produces consistent results when operated correctly, they'd stop waiting for God to maybe answer prayers and start operating as monad consciousness, claiming what's already available. And the Church couldn't allow that. You've asked for things your whole life and nothing happened, or things manifested randomly, inconsistently, unpredictably, like luck or coincidence. Sometimes prayers seem to work. Usually they didn't. And you were told it's because God said no, or it wasn't His will, or you didn't have enough faith, or you needed to wait for His timing. But something in you always knew that didn't make sense. Why would Jesus promise ask and receive if receiving is actually rare and random? That's because you were taught to ask as a separated human, begging an external God for favors. And that's not the asking Jesus taught. Jesus taught that asking is the monad recognizing what already exists in infinite Source and aligning consciousness to receive it. There's a system-specific way of asking that works every single time. Not because you're manipulating God, but because you're operating how consciousness and manifestation actually function. The monad has mechanics, and when you know them, asking becomes claiming and receiving becomes automatic. The Church hid this teaching for 2,000 years because if you knew how to ask correctly, you wouldn't need them to intercede. You wouldn't need priests praying on your behalf. You wouldn't need religious rituals earning God's favor. You would be direct and sovereign. Asking as monad and receiving from Source, consistently and predictably, makes institutional religion obsolete. Tonight, you're learning the exact ask and receive system Jesus taught. The three parts that have to be present: how it works, why it works, and how to use it starting tonight to ask correctly and receive what you're asking for. Not hoping, but knowing. If you're learning the monad's ask and receive system tonight, comment, "I ask as monad," right now. You've asked, prayed, requested, and begged God, "Please give me this. Please help me with that. Please heal this. please provide that. Please make this situation work out. And most of the time, nothing but silence. Or worse, the opposite of what you asked for happened. Things got harder. Prayers seemed to bounce off the ceiling, and religious people told you it's because God said no, or it wasn't His will, or the answer is not yet, or you didn't have enough faith, or you had unconfessed sin blocking your prayers, or you needed to pray harder, longer, and more sincerely. But something in you always knew that didn't make sense. Why would Jesus say, "Ask, and you shall receive, seek, and you shall find, knock, and it shall be opened," if the actual experience is that you ask and usually get nothing? Why promise receiving if asking almost never works? That's because the asking you were taught isn't the asking Jesus taught. You were taught to ask as a small, separated, unworthy human, hoping a big external God sitting on a throne decides you're worthy enough, sincere enough, or faithful enough to receive what you're requesting. That's not asking. That's begging. And begging doesn't activate the monad system. Begging is lack consciousness broadcasting. I don't have this. I need this. I'm desperate for this. And consciousness creates reality. So lack consciousness creates more lack. You ask from, "I don't have," and reality reflects, "You don't have." That's why it doesn't work. Not because God said no, but because you're operating the system wrong. The church never taught you there's a specific way to ask that works and a way that doesn't. They taught you to just ask humbly, have faith, be sincere, and hope God answers in His mysterious timing, according to His unknowable will. But Jesus taught chosen ones a system, mechanics, specific consciousness, specific frequency, and specific recognition that has to be present for asking to produce receiving. It's not a mystery. It's not that God works in mysterious ways. It's systematic. Ask from this frequency, with this recognition in this alignment, and receiving is automatic. Not because you earned it, not because God decided you deserve it, but because you're operating the system correctly. It's like knowing a password. If you know it, access is granted every time. Not because the system likes you, but because that's how access systems work. The monad has a system, and if you know how to ask within that system, receiving isn't random divine favor. It's an inevitable systematic result. The church hid this because pneumatics who know the system don't need priests interceding, don't need church rituals, and don't need religious performance. They ask directly, as monad, and receive directly from source. And that makes the entire institutional structure obsolete. You don't need them anymore, and they couldn't allow that. Jesus made a distinction the church completely erased between asking and begging. Begging is what you were taught. "Please God, I need this. I'm desperate. Can you give me this, if it's your will?" That is a separated human petitioning an external authority. Asking the way Jesus taught is recognition-based claiming. You're not requesting something you don't have. You're aligning consciousness with what already exists in infinite source. The monad isn't a person deciding whether to grant favors. It's infinite consciousness. Everything already exists within it. When you ask correctly, you're not convincing God to create something new. You're aligning with what already is, not petition, but alignment. The system has 3 parts, and all 3 are required. You can't skip one. First, ask from already having, not from lack. You were taught to ask from need. "God, I don't have this. Please give it." That's lack consciousness, and lack creates more lack. Jesus taught the opposite. At Lazarus's tomb, before commanding him to rise, he said, "Father, I thank you that you have already heard me." Past tense, already done. Not, "Please maybe raise him," but, I recognize wholeness already is. That's asking from already having. Not, please make it be, but I recognize it is. That frequency shift from I don't have to it is changes everything. Consciousness creates reality. I don't have creates not having. It is creates manifestation. Second, ask as monad, not a separated human. When you ask as a small human separate from God, you're in the wrong identity. Wrong identity can't access what's available to true identity. Jesus taught to ask from the recognition that you and Source are one. Not, I'm here small and needy, you're there big and powerful. But I am monad consciousness. I and the Father are one. I'm accessing what's already within Source, which is what I am. That's not arrogance. That's recognition of your actual nature. And when you ask as monad, you're not begging an external source. You're claiming internal access to what's yours by nature. Petition becomes claiming. Third, receive immediately in consciousness, then allow material form to follow. Most people ask, then wait to see if it manifests before believing they received. That breaks the system. You're back in lack. I ask but don't see it yet, so I don't have it. Jesus taught the opposite. Receive in consciousness first. The moment you ask correctly from already having as monad, you receive it. Not materially yet, but in consciousness you know you have it, and that knowing allows material form to follow. Material follows consciousness, not the other way around. You don't wait for proof to believe. You receive in consciousness, know it's done, and watch it manifest. Consciousness first, material second. This works because you're operating mechanics correctly. The monad isn't a person with preferences. It's consciousness. And consciousness responds to consciousness. When you broadcast lack, I don't have, reality mirrors lack. When you broadcast already having, I recognize this exists, I'm monad accessing it, I receive now, reality mirrors that. It's mechanical. Frequency creates matching manifestation. Jesus understood this completely. He never begged God to maybe heal someone. He recognized wholeness already is, received it in consciousness, and spoke it into form with a be healed command, because he'd already received it in consciousness. This is the system, and the church removed it, because people operating it don't need priests interceding. They ask as monad, receiving in consciousness, and watch it manifest, direct and sovereign. The moment you shift from asking as a separated human, begging an external God, to asking as monad recognizing what already exists in Source, everything changes immediately. You stop feeling desperate when you ask. You stop wondering anxiously if God will say yes or no. You stop waiting in painful suspense to see if prayers get answered. You ask from, I recognize this already exists in infinite Source. You receive it immediately in consciousness, knowing it's done, completed, and yours. Then you calmly watch it appear in material form, not hoping it will, but knowing it will because you've already received it where it matters. In consciousness, material form always follows consciousness. Always. It's not optional. It's systematic. You're not in lack vibration anymore, desperately wanting something you don't have. You're in receiving vibration, knowing you already have it in consciousness and watching material reality catch up. And that shift in vibration, from lack to already having, is what allows manifestation. You're not blocking it with an I don't have frequency anymore. You're allowing it with an it is done frequency. Reality has to match that. It's mechanical. And the biggest shift is that manifestation stops being random luck or divine favor you can't predict and becomes a consistent, systematic result you can rely on. When you were asking wrong from lack, as a separated human, waiting for an external God to decide if you're worthy, results were inconsistent and random. Sometimes things happened, and you thought maybe God answered. Usually nothing happened, and you thought maybe God said no, or not yet. You had no idea what would work and what wouldn't. It felt like a lottery or a mystery. But when you ask correctly using the system from already having as monad, receiving in consciousness, immediately receiving becomes predictable. Not because you're controlling God, but because you're aligned with how consciousness actually works. Consciousness creates reality. When consciousness holds it is, reality manifests it is every time. That's not wishful thinking. That's mechanics. And once you understand the mechanics, once you operate the system correctly, results stop being random and become consistent. You ask correctly, you receive always. Not because you're special, but because the system works the same for everyone who operates it correctly. That's what Jesus was teaching. Not beg and hope God likes you enough to answer, but operate the system and receive systematically. And the Church buried that teaching completely. Only pneumatics can operate the ask and receive system the way Jesus taught it. Hylics can't ask as monad because they don't have monad consciousness to ask from. They're pure material, no spark, no access. Psychics might stumble into it occasionally, might have moments where they ask from higher consciousness and something manifests, but they can't sustain it. They can't stay in that frequency. But you, pneumatic, have the complete divine blueprint. When you ask from already having as monad, receiving in consciousness immediately, you're not pretending to be something you're not. You're not faking spiritual advancement. You're operating from your actual nature. You are monad expressed in form. That's not a claim. That's recognition of what you actually are. So asking as monad isn't role play. It's truth. And the moment you recognize that truth, the system activates naturally and automatically. You don't have to force it or earn it or build up to it. It's your design. You're built to ask as monad and receive from source. That's pneumatic function, and when you activate it, receiving stops being a mystery and becomes mechanics. One warning: when you start asking correctly and things start manifesting consistently, when people see that what you ask for actually happens reliably, they will accuse you of entitlement, of arrogance, of trying to control God, of playing God, or of spiritual ego. Ignore them completely. You're not controlling anything. You're aligning with how the system works. You're not manipulating God. You're operating mechanics. And that's not arrogance. That's understanding. It's like if someone accused you of arrogance for knowing how to use a door. You think you're so special just walking through doors whenever you want. That's absurd. You're not special for knowing how doors work. You just know the mechanics. Same with the ask and receive system. You're not special. You just know how it works. And knowing how it works allows you to use it. That's not playing God. That's operating as monad, which is what you are. This is the ask and receive system Jesus taught that the Church completely removed from Christianity. 3 parts, all 3 required. Ask from already having, not from lack. Ask as monad, not as a separated human. Receive immediately in consciousness. Then allow material manifestation to follow. That's the system. Not petition and maybe. Not beg and hope God decides you're worthy. Alignment and automatic. Recognize and receive. And when you operate it correctly, receiving isn't random divine favor dependent on whether God likes you today. It's a systematic result dependent on whether you're operating the mechanics correctly. The monad isn't withholding from you. You're blocking yourself with wrong asking, lack consciousness, separated identity, and waiting for material proof before believing you received. Fix those three things. Ask from already having as monad. Receiving in consciousness now, and receiving becomes inevitable. The Church hid this for 2,000 years because pneumatics who know the system don't need intercession. They ask, they receive. Direct, consistent, sovereign. And that makes the Church obsolete. If you're using the monad ask and receive system starting tonight, do three things right now. First, comment, "I ask as monad," below. Declare you're operating the system correctly from now on. Second, subscribe for advanced teachings on asking from already having, receiving in consciousness, and allowing consistent manifestation. Third, like this video, so other pneumatics discover the system Jesus taught that the Church buried. Do all three now. Then tonight, ask for something specific. But don't ask from lack. Don't beg. Ask from recognition that it already exists in infinite source. Ask as monad. You and source are one. You're accessing what's already available, and receive it immediately in consciousness. Know it's done. Feel it completed. Don't wait to see it materially before believing you received. Receive it now in consciousness, and then watch material reality conform. You're not begging anymore. You're not hoping. If this ancient system has changed the way you view your connection to the source, please subscribe and like the channel. We are uncovering the profound truths that they tried to bury for centuries. Claim your divine inheritance. The next key to the kingdom will be revealed soon.